The air pressure drops so fast it feels like a physical blow to the chest, a sudden vacuum seal on the lungs that sucks the warmth right out of the cabin. A violent, predatory roar of freezing wind, a 200-mile-per-hour scream, swallows the rhythmic hum of the twin engines. In the back of Northwest Orient, Flight 305, Tina Mucklow, a flight attendant whose adrenaline is the only thing keeping her standing, stares at an empty seat. Seat 18C is a tomb of discarded intentions. As on the cushion lies a black clip-on tie and a mother-of-pearl tie clip. Beyond it, the aft door stands wide, a jagged mouth leading into a black, swirling abyss. 10,000 feet below, there is only the unforgiving, rain-slicked canopy of the Pacific Northwest, a wilderness of pine and shadow so dense it swallows light. No parachute in sight, no frantic struggle heard over the intercom. Just the mechanical scream of the turbine and the realization that the man in seat 18C didn't just jump. He evaporated into the cold physics of the storm. He was a ghost before he even left the ground. November 24, 1971, Portland International Airport. In an era before metal detectors, before digital footprints, and before the world lost its innocence to the sky, he exists only as a name scrawled on a manifest: Dan Cooper. He's wearing a dark suit, a white collared shirt, and a black raincoat that seems to absorb the airport's fluorescent hum like a sponge. Or he looks like a middle manager on a Tuesday, a man designed by nature to be forgotten. He orders a bourbon and soda with the casual ease of a man who has done this 1,000 times. He pays in cash, crisp, unremarkable bills. He's calm, frighteningly calm, with a pulse that likely didn't skip a beat as he checked his watch against the terminal clock. Investigators would later obsess over the name. Dan Cooper wasn't just an alias. It was a character from a French comic book about a heroic Canadian Air Force pilot. This wasn't a random choice. It was a signal, a wink to those who knew the lore. When you're planning to challenge the laws of gravity and the collective might of the FBI, you don't sweat. You wait for the ice to melt in your glass, watching the world through tinted lenses, knowing that in 2 hours, your name will be the most famous secret in America. Miss, you'd better look at that note. He hands it to Florence Schaffner. She's 23, professional, and accustomed to the unwanted attention of lonely travelers. She thinks it's a phone number, another clumsy attempt at a mid-flight romance. She drops it into her purse, unopened. But Cooper isn't looking for a date. He's looking for leverage. He leans in, his voice a low, steady baritone. Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb. When she opens the briefcase in the dim light of the galley, the world tilts on its axis. She doesn't see a heart. She sees 8 red cylinders, industrial-grade dynamite, lashed together with copper wire, a large battery, a toggle switch, a promise of total, scorched earth incineration. This wasn't the desperate act of a madman or the frantic grab of a junkie. This was a professional heist performed at 30,000 feet by a man who understood the architecture of fear. No, he chose the Boeing 727 for a reason that escaped the FBI for hours. The rear aft stairs could be lowered in flight without structural failure. He didn't just hijack a flight, he hijacked a specific piece of aeronautical engineering that he knew better than the pilots themselves. The FBI calls it the Cooper paradox. Most hijackers are frantic, ego-driven, or screaming political slogans into a cockpit microphone. Cooper was the gentleman bandit. He was courteous to the point of absurdity. Where he tipped the flight attendants, he offered to buy the crew meals while they sat on the tarmac in Seattle, trapped in a high-stakes standoff with federal snipers. This wasn't just manners, it was tactical psychological warfare. By being the nice guy, he lowered the crew's guard, preventing the very panic that usually foils a hijacking. Then there was the money. He insisted the ransom be in negotiable American currency, $20 bills, not hundreds, which are flagged and difficult to pass in a post-gold standard economy. and not ones, which would weigh nearly 100 pounds. He was thinking about the exact weight of the money, roughly 21 pounds, against the drag of the wind and the specific gravity of survival. He was a man who understood that, in a jump from a jet, every ounce is a variable that can kill you. He wasn't just a criminal. He was an operative treating a felony like a Cold War extraction. The money is delivered. So $200,000, a fortune that could buy a small town in 1971. 4 parachutes are brought on board. The passengers are released, walking off the plane into the safety of the Seattle rain, completely oblivious to the fact that they were inches away from a fuel-soaked fireball for the last 4 hours. The plane takes off again, headed for Reno, shadowed by 2 F-106 fighter jets. But the jets are useless. Cooper tells the pilot to fly low, exactly 10,000 feet. Flaps at 15 degrees. Landing gear down. On the F-106Es are built for supersonic interception. They can't fly that slow without stalling out of the sky. Cooper has neutralized the military's eyes. He is alone in the back of the plane, the only human being in a pressurized metal tube hurtling through a thunderhead. At 8:12 p.m., the pressure bump occurs. The pilots feel the tail kick up as if the aircraft had suddenly lost its shadow. They call out over the intercom, their voices tight with a new, hollow kind of fear. No answer. The cabin is a wind tunnel. The ghost has left the machine, stepping off a vibrating metal plank into a wall of freezing water. Imagine the transition. 1 minute, you are in a pressurized, heated cabin, the smell of jet fuel and stale tobacco around you. The next, you are standing on a vibrating metal plank, staring into a 200-mile-per-hour gale. It's 20 degrees below zero. It's pitch black, a void so thick you can't see your own hands. The rain doesn't fall, and it hits your skin like shards of broken glass. Cooper jumped with a non-steerable military parachute, a round chute that offers no control over where you land. He jumped into the L5 flight path, a corridor of wilderness known as the Green Hell. The FBI spent months scouring the woods of Ariel, Washington. They found nothing. No shredded silk, no broken bones, no scattered bills. Consider the implications. Would a man who meticulously planned the flight path, the currency, and in the aircraft type really jump into a storm he couldn't survive? Or was the jump the ultimate misdirection? Did he know that the reserve parachute he took was actually a dummy chute used for classroom demonstrations, sewn shut and useless? If he didn't check it, he was an amateur. If he did, he was telling the FBI that he never intended to use it. 1980. 9 years of silence. The case is a cold, dusty file in the Seattle field office. Then, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram is digging in the silt at Tina Bar along the Columbia River. He's looking for a place to build a fire. Instead, he finds 3 bundles of cash buried under a few inches of sand. $5,800. Rotting. Water damaged. The serial numbers match Cooper's ransom perfectly. The FBI exhales. The river finally gave up its dead. But the science told a different story. In 2008, citizen sleuths used electron microscopes to analyze the bills, and they found microscopic diatoms, tiny algae, that only bloom in the spring. Cooper jumped in November. If the bills had been in the river since the jump, they would be covered in winter silt. Instead, they were clean of winter debris, suggesting they weren't in the water until months or years later. Furthermore, the rubber bands were still elastic. In the harsh chemicals of a riverbed, rubber bands rot in 5 years. If Cooper died in 1971, how did the money stay bound together until 1980? Someone didn't just lose this money. Someone planted it. The most damning evidence isn't the money, it's the tie. For decades, it sat in an evidence locker, a forgotten accessory. But modern forensics found something the 1971 labs couldn't: titanium. Specifically, pure titanium and rare earth elements like cerium and strontium. In 1971, pure titanium was almost exclusively used in high-end aerospace labs and chemical plants, places like Boeing's Supersonic Transport (SST) project. As this changes the profile, Cooper wasn't just a disgruntled vet or a daredevil. He was likely an engineer or a lab technician. He was an insider. He knew the 727 because he might have helped build it. He knew the flight paths because he studied them. He was a man with a high-clearance background who decided to take his pension in one night of high-altitude theft. He left the tie not as a mistake, but as a signature, a piece of his old life left behind in seat 18C. Over the decades, the faces change in the FBI's wanted folders like a deck of cards being shuffled by a magician. Richard McCoy, who pulled a near-identical heist months later but lacked Cooper's surgical precision. Sheridan Peterson, the experienced smoke jumper who was in the right place at the wrong time. Robert Rackstraw, the special ops veteran with CIA ties and a smirk that seemed to say, "Catch me if you can." Rackstraw even sent coded letters to newspapers, mocking the FBI's inability to find him. Each one fits the sketch. Each one has the military background, the nerves of steel, the resentment of the system. But the DNA on the tie doesn't match. The fingerprints on the bourbon glass don't stick. We want it to be a specific man because we fear the idea of a nameless genius who beat the world. We need Cooper to be human so we can understand why he did it. For the money, for the fame, for the thrill. But what if Cooper wasn't a man? What if he was a projection of every person who ever wanted to walk away from their life, leave their tie on the seat, and vanish into the clouds without a trace? A phantom born from the turbulence of the 1970s. The air pressure never truly returned to normal on Flight 305. The cabin stayed cold, a phantom draft forever haunting the aft stairs. Somewhere in the dense emerald woods of Ariel, Washington, there might be a skeleton wearing a dark suit, its pockets filled with the heavy paper of a forgotten ransom, now just compost for the ferns. Or, perhaps, there is an old man in a quiet coastal town, sipping a bourbon and soda, laughing at a faded newspaper clipping, while the rain taps against his window in a familiar rhythm. We obsess over the money and the parachutes, the suspects, and the silt. But we miss the most haunting detail. The tie. He took the time to remove it, to unclip the fabric from his collar, before he stepped into the void. It was a final act of order before embracing total, terminal chaos. He stripped away the persona of the middle manager and became the storm. The door was locked from the inside, the room was empty, and the sky doesn't keep secrets. It just waits for the next person brave enough to jump into the dark.